I was late. My shoes were soaked from a puddle, my blouse wrinkled from running, and I was gripping a resume I'd reprinted 3 times. This was the interview, the one that could get me out of food service and into something real. I turned a corner and slammed straight into someone. Papers flew. Coffee spilled. My heel snapped. I froze. He just laughed, helped me up, and handed me my resume like it was made of gold. I barely looked at him. I just ran. But he didn't forget me. 3 days later, I got a call, not from the job I interviewed for, but from another office I never even applied to. Mr. Reed saw potential, the voice said. I showed up confused. Same building, higher floor. And there he was, the guy I crashed into. In a sharp suit, calm, smiling. You made an impression, he said. I was stunned. He offered me a paid internship on the spot. I didn't ask how or why. I just said why. It didn't take long for reality to settle back in. My first day on the job was overwhelming. I had no idea what half the team was talking about. Acronyms flew over my head. Everyone seemed to know each other, and they all had the kind of backgrounds I'd only ever read about. Private colleges, internships abroad, LinkedIn profiles polished like magazine spreads. I showed up with my thrifted blazer and a used planner that still had someone else's name scribbled inside. I was used to surviving in chaos, not navigating structured success. I learned quickly, but it came with shame. I Googled terms under my desk, stayed late to rewatch tutorials on campaign software, and quietly edited emails 5 times before hitting send. I told no one that I still worked part-time at a cafe on weekends, or that I walked 30 minutes to work to save on bus fare. But even as I fumbled, little things kept working in my favor. A senior analyst forwarded me internal resources, only to later admit someone had suggested I loop you in. Someone set up a mentorship call for me with a woman I deeply admired, someone whose calendar, I'd been told, was booked months in advance. One afternoon, a delivery guy dropped off a new mouse and keyboard for my desk. No name. No explanation. Just a post-it note that read, "You shouldn't have to struggle to keep up. R. Ray." I hadn't seen him much in person after that first day, but he was there. Quietly. Behind the curtain. He never took credit for anything. If I asked, he brushed it off, said it was nothing, that he just nudged a few people or mentioned my name. I told myself it was kindness. That he was just that type. Maybe he knew what it felt like to be overlooked. Or maybe he saw something in me that I hadn't learned to see in myself. But a small voice kept whispering questions I didn't want to face. Who was he really? Why was he helping me like this? People didn't do this. Not without expecting something in return. But he never asked for anything. Never hinted. Never crossed any lines. He just showed up in quiet, powerful ways, like a hand lifting me just high enough to see over a wall I'd been staring at my whole life, and I let it happen. Because for the first time in a long time, I was moving forward. Not crawling, not begging, moving. I wasn't ready to pull back the curtain. Not yet. Not when the dream was finally starting to feel real. It was 2 months into the internship when I finally saw Ray again in a way that didn't feel like a blur. I just wrapped a late meeting that ran long because someone had forgotten to attach the correct files to a client presentation. Me. I was mortified, convinced I'd ruined everything. I stayed back to fix it, didn't even realize everyone else had already left. When I stepped out, the office floor was dim, almost silent except for the soft hum of vending machines, and there he was, sitting on the ledge of the window, coat folded beside him, eyes on the city. "Rough day?" he asked, not turning to look. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Disaster." He smirked. "Let me guess. Johnson's pitch." I winced. "You heard." "I hear most things," he said, finally turning his head to meet my eyes. It was a strange moment, unplanned and fragile. I walked over, not knowing why, and stood a few feet from him. Close enough to talk, but far enough to pretend this was still professional. He patted the ledge beside him. Saturday there was a pause. Not awkward. Just open. Then he said something that stuck with me. You don't owe anyone perfection to prove you deserve to be here. I didn't respond right away. I'd heard that sentiment before, but never from someone like him, someone who, by all appearances, did belong. I wanted to ask why he was being this way. Why he kept showing up in these quiet, non-intrusive ways like he was trying to repair cracks he wasn't responsible for. Instead, I asked, do you ever feel like you're pretending to be someone smarter than you are just to survive a room? He smiled slowly, looking down at his hands. All the time. The trick is, I stopped apologizing for it. We sat like that for a while. Just two people with wildly different starting points, sharing silence. Eventually, he stood up, pulled his coat over his arm, and said, I'll walk you to the train. I didn't protest. I should have, maybe. But there was comfort in the way he walked beside me, never too close, never trying to lead, just matching my pace like he'd been doing it for years. On the platform, I thanked him. Again. For everything. He just shook his head and said, Don't thank me. Just keep going. It was the way he said it. Like he wasn't doing me a favor, but asking me to do something for myself. Like my progress was the point. Not his generosity. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was moving forward on ground someone else had paved. And I didn't know what that meant. Not yet, but part of me, some small, stubborn part, was starting to care about him more than I was comfortable admitting, not because he helped me, but because he never made me feel like I was being helped. They say kindness has no price, but I was starting to feel like I was racking up a debt I didn't fully understand. Every small victory I had, every task I completed, every meeting I contributed to, it was followed by someone mentioning Ray's name. Quietly. Casually. But always there. Oh, Ray said you were sharp. Ray told us to give you some room. Ray believes in your potential. Each time I heard it, my stomach twisted. Not because I wasn't grateful. I was. But because it made me question how far I would have made it on my own. How much of what I was accomplishing belonged to me, and how much of it was an illusion, propped up by someone else's faith in me. That kind of faith can feel like a spotlight. Warming at first. But eventually it starts to burn. One day, a colleague, I'll call her Serena, pulled me aside. She was friendly, smart, and someone I had come to admire. But that day, her smile was a little too careful. Can I ask you something? She said. I nodded. What's your connection to Ray? The way she asked, measured, polite, it told me everything. There were whispers. People were watching. Maybe not maliciously, but with curiosity. And curiosity can become suspicion if left unanswered. I told her the truth. That we met by accident. That he helped me get a position. That he was just kind. She listened, nodded slowly, then said, That's rare. But good rare. I guess. I knew what she meant. Kindness without motive didn't quite add up in their world. Power without strings attached. Suspicious. I went home that night and stared at my ceiling, thinking about every moment that had led me here. My resume. My ambition. My sleepless nights. And yet, would any of that have mattered if I hadn't collided with him on that street corner? And deeper still, I asked myself a question I couldn't answer. If Ray wasn't just kind, if there was something more to his interest in me, was I ready to face it? I didn't know. All I knew was that my feelings were changing. That my gratitude was evolving into something messier. That when he wasn't around, I caught myself looking for him. I wanted to believe I could earn my place in this world. I wanted to believe Ray helped me because he saw something real. But even if both were true, there was a truth I couldn't ignore. People don't just walk into your life and hand you ladders unless they're climbing towards something too. And I had no idea what Ray was climbing toward. It started slowly, the way most shifts do. Subtle changes in tone. Side glances I wasn't meant to notice. Lunch invitations that used to include me, no longer did. And I knew better than to ask why. Office spaces, no matter how polished, are still ecosystems, small worlds where reputations travel faster than sound. One afternoon, I overheard two colleagues near the elevator. They didn't see me step around the corner. They weren't cruel. Just casual. But sometimes, it's the casual words that cut deepest. She's the girl Ray vouched for, right? Yeah. In turn special projects. That's what happens when the boss's son takes an interest. They laughed, not maliciously, just knowingly. Like the punchline wasn't personal. Just predictable. I froze. Not because I was offended, but because they were right. Ray was the boss's son. Not just the son of some executive. His father owned the entire portfolio that funded multiple floors of this building. I hadn't known that at first. I'd Googled him months ago, but he kept such a low profile that his last name didn't even ring out the way some billionaire heirs' names did. But once I learned, I started to see it. The deference people showed him. The weight of his words in meetings. The doors that opened, quietly, when he walked past them. I walked back to my desk, stiff, my chest heavy with a strange emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something more hollow. Like I'd been trying to build something, and someone just revealed I'd been handed scaffolding the whole time. Ray didn't act like someone powerful. That was the thing. He took the stairs when the elevator was crowded. He said thank you to interns. He carried his own coffee. That humility made me trust him. But now, I didn't know if I had been naive or just willfully blind. That night, I stayed late again. Partly because I had work to finish, partly because I didn't want to go home with all those questions echoing inside me. He found me in the break room, staring into a cup of tea I'd forgotten to drink. You look like you're having an existential crisis, he said, offering a tired smile. I met his gaze. Why didn't you tell me who you were? He didn't flinch. He didn't pretend not to know what I meant. I didn't want you to treat me differently, he said. Or worse, treat yourself differently. I appreciated the honesty. But it didn't soothe the ache. Everyone thinks I got here because of you, I whispered. He sat across from me. And maybe you did. But staying here, that's you. It was a kind thing to say. But kindness, when laced with power, starts to feel like permission. I don't know if I can untangle what I've earned from what you've given, I admitted. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Then maybe stop trying to untangle it, he said. Just keep going. Keep learning. If you're good at what you do, they'll see it eventually. If they don't, that's their blindness. Not your failure. I wanted to believe him. More than anything. But in the back of my mind, the line between favor and faith blurred a little more each day, and I still didn't know why I was the one he'd chosen to help. What it meant. Or what it would cost me. After that night, something shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the quiet spaces between interactions. I started pulling back, not because I stopped trusting Ray, but because I wasn't sure I could trust myself around him anymore. Feelings are slippery things. They creep in quietly. You don't notice them until you're rearranging your schedule to coincidentally pass someone in the hallway. Until your heart jumps a little too fast when you see their name in an inbox. Until your silence becomes louder than your presence. I found myself wondering if Ray knew. If he saw the shift. If he felt it too, but he didn't say anything. He kept being the same version of himself, generous, respectful, distant enough to make everything feel professional. And yet, not distant enough to make me forget. I started focusing harder on work. I volunteered for extra assignments, stayed late without needing to. I told myself I was building my reputation, proving I could stand without his shadow, but every now and then, he'd leave a post-it on my desk with a note about something he saw in my report. A question I'd raised in a meeting. A thank you for something I didn't think anyone noticed. One afternoon, he left a book on my chair. A memoir by a woman who built a marketing empire after being denied 27 times. Inside was a note. I think you'll like her story. Reminds me a bit of you. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to tell him to stop. That I needed to find my own momentum now. That I was grateful, but I couldn't be tethered to the gratitude forever. But another part of me didn't want the notes to stop. Didn't want the kindness to fade. Because the truth is, I was starting to wonder who I was outside of this strange bond. This unspoken connection that had no definition, no name, and maybe that's what made it so powerful. The ambiguity. The way it floated just above the rules without ever breaking them. Still, I knew something had to give. The feelings weren't going away. They were growing in the silence, and I didn't know if they would ruin everything, or reveal what had been there all along. The invitation came on a Tuesday. A cream-colored envelope, heavier than normal paper, with my name in handwriting I recognized too well. I found it on my desk after lunch, no note attached, just the card inside. It was for a fundraiser, one of those corporate glamour events held in a downtown ballroom with live music, name tags, and linen tablecloths. The company name was embossed in gold. And so was Ray's. At first, I thought it had been sent to everyone. But when I asked around, no one else seemed to get one, not interns, not junior associates. Just me. I stared at it for hours. Every part of me wanted to believe it was nothing. A friendly gesture. A way to include me in a world I'd been working so hard to reach. But the other part of me, wiser, wearier, knew better. Because it wasn't just about the event. It was about what it meant to be seen with him there. In his world. That night I called my sister. She always had a way of grounding me. He probably just respects your work, she said. Not everything is about feelings. Yeah, I whispered, but some things are. The evening of the fundraiser, I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I'd like to admit. My dress was simple, elegant, borrowed from a friend who wore the same size. I told myself this was professional. That I was representing myself, not chasing something emotional. But my heartbeat said otherwise. When I walked into the ballroom, the noise hit me first. Laughter, glasses clinking, conversations thick with confidence. It was the kind of room I used to watch from a distance, wondering how people belonged there so easily. Ray spotted me near the entrance. He looked different in a tux. Older. Calmer. Like he belonged not just in the room, but in charge of it. You came, he said, his smile soft. You invited me, I replied, trying to steady my voice. He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. I'm glad you did. The rest of the night blurred. People introduced themselves, some recognizing my name from emails or presentations. A few seemed surprised that I was the intern Ray had vouched for. One woman leaned in and said, "You must be special," like it was a compliment. But it didn't feel like one. Still, Ray stayed close, but not too close. Always just enough to let me move freely. To decide whether I was his guest or my own person. At one point, we ended up outside on the balcony, the city lights stretching out like a sea of possibilities. Why me, I asked. Finally. He looked out at the skyline. Then back at me. Because you reminded me of who I was before everyone started expecting things from me, he said. Because you're not trying to impress people. You're just trying to become someone real. And because I wanted to know what would happen if I believed in someone who wasn't already born into it. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But feelings can complicate even the purest intentions. He turned to leave, then paused. You're allowed to feel everything you feel, he said. Even if it doesn't fit into a neat little box. I watched him walk back inside, feeling more seen than I ever had before. And more unsure than ever about what came next. The days after the fundraiser were quieter. Not just outside, but inside me. I moved through the office with a kind of purposeful restraint, as if I was walking a line I wasn't allowed to cross. Ray didn't treat me any differently. He didn't start texting me at odd hours or calling for meetings that weren't on the calendar. If anything, he kept a measured distance, like he was waiting for me to set the next direction. But I couldn't deny it anymore. I was falling for him. And not just in the heady, butterfly way that makes you feel alive. It was deeper than that. Quieter. The kind of feeling that makes you rewrite how you see yourself. And it scared me. Because how do you tell someone that the line between admiration and affection has already blurred, without risking everything? I kept trying to convince myself it would pass. That I was just caught up in the attention, in the gratitude, in the illusion that someone like him could actually choose someone like me for something more than a professional favor. But then, one Friday evening, it happened. We both stayed late, again. The office was nearly empty. I was finishing up numbers for a campaign report, and he was reviewing something at the window seat where we first really talked. I wasn't planning to speak to him. I wasn't planning anything, but he looked up and said, "Come here for a second." I hesitated. Walked over slowly. Sat beside him. He didn't speak right away. just looked out the glass at the street below. Then he said, "You're not just the girl I helped. You know that, right?" I nodded slowly, unsure if I could speak. "I feel it too," he added. "Whatever this is. I don't know where it fits. But it's there." His voice was low, careful, like he was offering something fragile. The air between us was thick with things unsaid. But there was no touch. No declarations. Just two people sitting too close to keep pretending this was nothing. I told him, finally, "I don't want to mess up what I've worked for," and he said, "Then we don't mess it up. We move carefully. We protect what we've both earned." There was something comforting in that. In the idea that it didn't have to be all or nothing. That we didn't have to destroy one part of ourselves to nurture another. But I knew, deep down, the world wouldn't see it that way. In a room full of power and perception, feelings like these weren't allowed to breathe. Still, we had already exhaled. For a while, nothing changed. At least, not outwardly. We kept our distance during meetings. We didn't linger too long in the break room. We didn't sit beside each other in group discussions. If anyone had watched us from the outside, they would have seen two professionals focused on their work, like always. But I knew. I knew because I had to steady myself before every conversation. I knew because I stopped taking the elevator just to avoid the silence that sometimes buzzed too loud between us. I knew because I started to miss things I'd never had in the first place. And then, like most things we try to control, it slipped. It was raining that evening. One of those unexpected downpours that left people scrambling with their phones out, looking for the next rideshare. I hadn't brought an umbrella. Neither had he. We both stood near the building's exit, watching the city blur behind streaks of water. "Let me give you a ride," he said casually. I hesitated. Just long enough for him to add, "No pressure." "I'm heading that direction anyway." I nodded. The car was warm. Quiet. He played some indie playlist I didn't recognize, and for a moment, it felt like we were just two people sharing space, not tension. But then he pulled up to my apartment, and I hesitated again. Not because of the distance. But because something inside me didn't want to leave. "Not yet, thank you," I said. He nodded. "Any time." I reached for the door handle, and his voice stopped me. "Can I ask you something?" I turned, heart suddenly louder than the rain. "If none of this existed, work, my last name, the whispers, what would you want?" It wasn't a question meant to be answered lightly. I sat back slowly, looking at him. Really looking. "I'd want." I swallowed. "I'd want to be able to choose you. Without it feeling like I was giving up myself." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full. Heavy. He nodded once. Slowly. "That's all I ever wanted to." I left the car then. Without looking back. Not because I was ashamed. But because I knew the line had shifted. And I didn't know how long we could keep pretending we hadn't crossed it. The next morning, I walked into the office and felt it. Something had changed. Maybe nothing had happened, but something had. And sometimes, it's not about what people know, it's about what they sense. One of the senior associates, a woman named Marla, asked to see me privately. Her tone was clipped, formal. "You've been doing good work," she said. But I'd be cautious. People talked. I wanted to ask who, but I didn't. Because I already knew the answer. What scared me most wasn't that people were talking. It was that I couldn't say they were wrong, because the truth was, somewhere between gratitude and admiration, I had fallen for him. And that changed everything. The following week felt like walking a tightrope above an invisible crowd. Every email I sent, every comment I made in meetings, I waited twice. I double-checked my tone. I stopped myself from glancing in his direction. We hadn't spoken since that night in the car. Not beyond essentials. And even then, it was all business. No jokes. No pauses. No post-its. I missed them more than I wanted to admit. But I also understood. We both knew we had edged into territory neither of us were prepared to handle, not with titles, reputations, and 100 eyes watching. One morning, I caught sight of him walking out of a boardroom. He looked tired. Not in the physical sense, but in that heavy way people carry when they're holding something in. Later that day, I found a file on my desk. No name, no note. Just a single sheet with numbers I had flagged in a report last month, now updated with his handwriting in the margins. Small corrections. A quiet message. I see you. I still believe in your work. I sat there for a long time, wondering how something so simple could feel so intimate. Wondering if anyone else could understand the strange loneliness of a connection that can't speak its own name. I thought about asking him to coffee. To clear the air. To find out what this was or wasn't. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the voice in my head reminding me that I had already started earning things on my own now, and I couldn't afford to blur the lines again. That Friday, the company hosted a casual happy hour at a rooftop lounge. It was supposed to be light, social, a chance to network. I wasn't planning to go. But at the last minute I did. Maybe just to prove to myself that I could exist in that world without being defined by him. He was there. Standing with two executives, smiling in that quiet way he always did. When he saw me, he didn't react. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But he shifted slightly. Made room near him. I didn't walk over. Not out of anger. But because I wanted to draw my own boundaries now. Instead, I joined a different group. Talked about new clients, upcoming pitches, laughed at a story someone told about a failed campaign. But every few minutes, my eyes found him again, and once, just once, I caught him looking too. It wasn't longing. It wasn't regret. It was something softer. Like he was reminding me, I'm still here, and I was, still moving forward, still unsure, still quietly hoping for a future that made space for both of us. But also, learning to stand tall in the waiting. I hadn't expected the email. It was brief, no pleasantries, no overcompensation. Just a time and place. A request. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I hadn't seen Ray outside of work for weeks. The emails were polite, professional. No more lingering glances or silent moments that held too much weight. We had both learned to protect ourselves. But now this invitation to meet. The cafe he chose was familiar, small enough to feel intimate without being claustrophobic. I arrived early. Not because I wanted to, more because I needed the time to prepare. To ask myself why this conversation was happening now. What had changed? I didn't sit long before he walked in. He looked the same as always, casual, composed. But there was a tiredness to him, the kind that comes with carrying something too long. He greeted me with a small smile. But it didn't reach his eyes. I thought we needed to talk, he said, sitting down across from me. I nodded, keeping my hands folded in my lap. My voice, when it came, was hesitant. About what? He leaned back, his gaze settling on mine. About everything. About what's been happening between us. About the way things are, shifting. His words landed softly but heavily, as though they held more meaning than the surface implied. I think it's been a while since we stopped pretending, I said quietly. I'm not sure if I can keep pretending like nothing's going on. He nodded slowly. I've felt it too. There was a pause between us. Not the awkward kind of pause, but one filled with the weight of unspoken truths, of something real hanging between us, something we both knew but hadn't addressed. I've been thinking about it a lot, he continued, his voice quieter now. About what we've both been building. And how, it feels like it's slipping. The lines we've drawn, the boundaries we've set, they're getting harder to keep in place. I felt a small shiver run through me. This was what I had been afraid of, wasn't it? That the distance between us would become too much to bear, that the slow, steady pull towards something more would tip over into something unsustainable. I don't want to lose everything because of this, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I intended. I don't want to lose what I've worked for, what we've both worked for. But I also don't want to keep pretending like it's nothing. He was silent for a moment, his eyes searching mine as though trying to decipher something. I never meant to put you in a position where you felt like you had to choose, he said, his voice tight. But I can't ignore it anymore. I can't pretend like we don't want something different. Something more. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. I wanted to say something, to tell him how much I wanted to believe him, to believe that this could work without tearing apart everything we had. But I couldn't. Because in the back of my mind, I still heard the warning bells. The doubts. The consequences. I don't know what to do with this, I said, the vulnerability in my voice surprising me. Ray leaned forward slightly, his eyes softening. Then let's figure it out. Together. We don't have to have all the answers today, but we don't have to ignore it either. We can't keep pretending we don't feel this pull. The moment hung between us like a thread that neither of us could let go of. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't standing on the edge of something I couldn't control. I felt like I was choosing to stand there. That maybe, this uncertainty wasn't something to avoid but something to embrace. I don't know if I'm ready for this, I whispered, more to myself than to him. He smiled, a small, understanding smile. No one ever is. I took a breath, letting the weight of his words wash over me. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to walk into the unknown together, without knowing exactly where it would lead. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that. The days after our conversation were filled with a strange sort of peace. Not the kind that comes from resolution, but the kind that comes from simply acknowledging the mess we were both in. And strangely enough, that acknowledgement made everything feel lighter, even though nothing had truly changed yet. We kept our distance at work. It wasn't that we were pretending, just that we didn't need to talk every moment, didn't need to make everything about what we felt. There was comfort in the silence, in the mutual understanding that we weren't running from what we had started to face, and yet, it felt harder. Every time I sat at my desk, I could feel the quiet weight of what could happen if I allowed myself to feel too much. And every time I passed Ray in the hall, I wondered if he could feel it too. That pull between us that had started so subtly, now impossible to ignore. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with everything we hadn't said until now. Filled with the unspoken promise that this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the lives we wanted to lead. The futures we wanted to shape. I'm scared too, he said softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to live wondering what if, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this. I didn't feel like I was making this decision on my own. Because here we were, standing on the edge together, both uncertain but both willing to take that step. We'll figure it out, I said, my voice steady now, more confident. One step at a time. He smiled, a small, soft smile that spoke volumes. One step at a time. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were real. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But we had this, a chance. A chance to move forward, to build something together, without the fear of losing everything in the process. We spent more time talking. Not just about work, but about everything. About who we were, about what we wanted, about the things we feared and the things we hoped for. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of questioning if we were doing the right thing. But in those moments we didn't run. We didn't hide from the truth, instead we faced it. Together. I didn't expect things to change overnight. Relationships, like anything meaningful, take time to build. But there was a shift. A subtle, almost imperceptible change in the way we interacted. A new sense of openness, of honesty that hadn't been there before, and slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict or running from tough choices. But the kind of peace that comes from making the hard decisions, from choosing to face the unknown, and trusting that you'll be okay on the other side. Ray and I didn't know what the future held. We didn't know if we were making the right choice or if we were setting ourselves up for failure. But what we did know was that we were willing to try. We were willing to walk this path, no matter how uncertain it was, because we believed in each other. And for the first time, I realized that sometimes, that's all you really need. We didn't have to figure it all out right away. We didn't have to have all the answers. But together we would find our way, and that, in itself, was enough. As I looked back at the journey we had already started, at the awkward moments, the difficult conversations, the fear, and the hope, I couldn't help but smile. Because no matter where this story would take us, no matter what the future held, we had taken the most important step of all. We had chosen each other. And that was just the beginning. There was a long silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with everything we hadn't said until now. Filled with the unspoken promise that this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the lives we wanted to lead. The futures we wanted to shape. I'm scared too, he said softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to live wondering what if, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in this. I didn't feel like I was making this decision on my own. Because here we were, standing on the edge together, both uncertain but both willing to take that step. We'll figure it out, I said, my voice steady now, more confident. One step at a time. He smiled, a small, soft smile that spoke volumes. One step at a time. The days that followed weren't easy, but they were real. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But we had this, a chance. A chance to move forward, to build something together, without the fear of losing everything in the process. We spent more time talking. Not just about work, but about everything. About who we were, about what we wanted, about the things we feared and the things we hoped for. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of questioning if we were doing the right thing. But in those moments we didn't run. We didn't hide from the truth, instead we faced it. Together. I didn't expect things to change overnight. Relationships, like anything meaningful, take time to build. But there was a shift. A subtle, almost imperceptible change in the way we interacted. A new sense of openness, of honesty that hadn't been there before, and slowly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict or running from tough choices. But the kind of peace that comes from making the hard decisions, from choosing to face the unknown, and trusting that you'll be okay on the other side. Ray and I didn't know what the future held. We didn't know if we were making the right choice or if we were setting ourselves up for failure. But what we did know was that we were willing to try. We were willing to walk this path, no matter how uncertain it was, because we believed in each other. And for the first time, I realized that sometimes, that's all you really need. We didn't have to figure it all out right away. We didn't have to have all the answers. But together we would find our way, and that, in itself, was enough. As I looked back at the journey we had already started, at the awkward moments, the difficult conversations, the fear, and the hope, I couldn't help but smile. Because no matter where this story would take us, no matter what the future held, we had taken the most important step of all. We had chosen each other. And that was just the beginning.